Nationalism and imperialism, two powerful ideologies that have shaped history in ways both inspiring and destructive. Today, we're diving into a controversial and thought-provoking comparison: Donald Trump's nationalist and imperialist rhetoric versus Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. How do they stack up? Are the comparisons valid, or do they oversimplify complex historical realities? Let's break it down. First, let's talk about nationalism. Nationalism is the idea that the interests of a nation should come first, often uniting people around shared culture, history, or identity. But it can also be used to exclude others, creating us versus them narratives. When it comes to Trump, nationalism was central to his America First agenda. He spoke about protecting American jobs, building a border wall, and pulling out of global agreements like the Paris Climate Accord. His message: the United States was being taken advantage of, and it was time to reclaim its greatness. Now, compare that to Hitler. His nationalism was far more extreme. The Nazi Party promoted the idea of Aryan racial superiority and believed Germany needed to expand its territory, what they called Lebensraum, or living space. Nationalism wasn't just about pride for Germany. It was about racial purity and conquest. Both Trump and Hitler used nationalism to rally support, but the key difference is in their focus. Trump's rhetoric centered on economic protectionism and immigration, while Hitler's was explicitly about racial purity and territorial expansion. One operated within a constitutional democracy, the other dismantled it entirely. Now let's look at imperialism. This is about extending a nation's power, whether through economics, military force, or colonization. Trump's approach was mostly economic. Think trade wars, tariffs on Chinese goods, and renegotiating deals like NAFTA. He was less interested in military expansion and more focused on maintaining U.S. dominance through economic leverage. In contrast, Hitler's imperialism was all about military conquest. The Nazis invaded Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, aiming to create a massive empire dominated by Aryans. This was imperialism in its most violent and expansionist form. So, while both leaders sought to assert their nation's dominance, Trump used trade policies, while Hitler relied on military invasions. The scale and consequences of their approaches couldn't be more different. Both Trump and Hitler understood the power of propaganda. Trump used modern tools, like social media, to speak directly to his supporters. He often focused on fear of immigrants, China, or what he called the deep state. The Nazis were masters of propaganda too. They used films, posters, and radio to spread messages of Aryan superiority and anti-Semitism. Fear was central to their strategy: fear of Jews, communists, and foreign powers. The big difference here? Trump's propaganda was divisive and inflammatory, but it didn't lead to genocide. Nazi propaganda, on the other hand, laid the foundation for the Holocaust and the deaths of millions. Trump's nationalist and imperialist policies had real consequences. They deepened political divides in the U.S., strained alliances, and reshaped trade relations. Domestically, his immigration policies and rhetoric polarized the nation. But the consequences of Hitler's policies were catastrophic. His expansionist ambitions triggered World War II, causing over 70 million deaths. The Holocaust alone resulted in the genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. Both leaders had significant impacts, but there's no comparison in terms of scale. Hitler's policies led to unparalleled levels of destruction, while Trump's caused disruptions but didn't approach the same magnitude of violence or human suffering. It's important to remember the context. Hitler came to power after World War I and the Great Depression, in a time of severe economic and political instability. Trump, on the other hand, operated within a modern democracy with checks and balances. And those checks mattered. Trump couldn't dismantle democratic institutions the way Hitler did. While his rhetoric was divisive, the system ultimately limited his power. Another key difference is ideology. Trump's policies didn't include genocidal ambitions or the systematic targeting of racial groups. Hitler's entire agenda revolved around extermination and global domination. So, what can we take away from this comparison? While there are similarities in their use of nationalism and propaganda, the differences in scale, intent, and historical context are significant. Trump's rhetoric disrupted norms and divided the US, but Hitler's actions led to one of the darkest chapters in human history.